Hey guys, so today's lesson is going to be about physical properties, which is essentially how we physically describe a chemical compound. And again, this is something that you should have already done in Science 9. Okay, so like I said, this lesson is physical properties. What we're going to be going over is essentially all of the different common ways that we physically describe a chemical substance. We're also going to be looking at what physical changes are. So a physical property is any information that you can gather about a substance just by observing it. And by observing it, we don't mean just looking at it, we mean using any of your five senses. So that includes things like sight, sound, touch, taste, I forget which one I didn't say, smell. um, You could also use measuring instruments to gather information. So it would include things like mass and density and volume and things like that. It does not involve actually changing the chemical composition of the substance. When it comes to identifying a substance, again, you can use your senses in order to do that. Hearing is a tough one to use. Sight is a really useful one. Smell can be really useful, but you should never just like go up and sniff a substance. You should just like waft it towards you. And then taste should never be done in a lab. You could do that like in your kitchen or something to identify what kind of like powder you were using, but that would be it. And same with touch. Touch is something you would want to be really careful about in a science lab or anywhere where you don't really know what kind of substances are around, if they could be dangerous or not. But obviously, in certain scenarios and in certain environments, it would be totally safe to touch something to identify it. So yeah, we can identify or differentiate between some substances just with those kind of senses and observations alone. However, there are a lot of shortfalls when you have substances that you can't touch or can't taste because it would be too dangerous, or substances that just look a lot alike, that have very similar physical properties. That's a big shortfall. When it comes to physical properties, they can be either qualitative or quantitative. The qualitative properties are ones that are not numerical. So things like saying the color of a substance or what it smells like, kind of just describing what it looks like, information that you can obtain with your five senses. It was rough or it was smooth, things like that. A quantitative property is information which is numerical, so it involves a number. Those are the properties that we obtain using measuring equipment. So whether you're determining volume or mass, if you need to like weigh it, stuff like that. So let's look at some common qualitative physical properties first here. So obviously, we've already talked about things like color, odor, which is smell, taste, and texture. Another one is luster, which is the shininess or dullness. So if we say that a substance is really lustrous, we mean it's really shiny. Optical clarity is how well light passes through it. So whether it's like transparent or translucent or opaque. Brittleness refers to how flexible or breakable something is. So if it's really brittle, that means it breaks really easily. It's not very flexible. Viscosity is the ability to pour or flow. So if something is really viscous, it doesn't pour very well. It's really thick, like pudding or molasses. Hardness is the ability to scratch or be scratched. So that's why diamonds are considered one of the hardest naturally occurring item, because it's really hard to scratch a diamond, and you can scratch most other substances with a diamond. Malleability is the ability to be molded or hammered into a thin sheet. So think like tin foil or aluminum foil, that really, really thin sheet of metal. Or if you've ever seen at like fancy restaurants or like on MasterChef and stuff, when they take like the little piece of like gold foil or gold leaf and like put it on something to eat, that really thin sheet of gold tells us that gold is really malleable. Ductility is the ability to be pulled into a fine strand or a wire. So think of like a copper wire. That is how like electricity gets passed to your lights and stuff. And then the last one, electrical conductivity, which is the ability to allow electric current to pass through it. Sometimes when we're talking about conductivity, we're talking about electrical conductivity. We can also sometimes talk about heat conductivity as well, which is how easily heat gets passed through a compound. So just go through these examples, make sure you have some examples of what is lustrous compared to what's not, what's viscous compared to what's not, malleable, etc. So yeah, try that. Okay, so physical changes. A physical change is anytime a substance changes its appearance, but not its composition. So in order to be a physical change, the makeup or the composition of that substance can't change. Changes of state are always physical. When you go from liquid water to ice, you're changing the state. It's going from liquid to solid, but the makeup of those molecules hasn't changed. It's still H2O molecules. So anytime you change state, you're not changing the actual makeup of those molecules, therefore it is physical. Dissolving is also physical. When you dissolve something, there's no chemical reaction that's happening there. All you're doing is essentially like hiding one molecule inside of or surrounded by another molecule, but those molecules aren't actually reacting with one another. If I dissolve salt into water to make salt water, I still have water molecules and salt ions floating around. I don't now have a new compound that is salt water. So that's why dissolving is always physical. So what I would like you guys to do is make sure that you know for each of these if it is physical or chemical. And we'll actually kind of take this up in the lesson that we're going to do coming up on chemical changes. Okay, so that is it for today's lesson.